The massive space station floated in the dark void like a metal city among the stars. Admiral Kang Day pressed his face against the cold window and watched the alien ships moving in perfect lines. The Galactic Council had called this meeting to show off their power, and every human representative could feel the weight of their arrogance. Supreme Commander Vexstar stood at the center of the Great Hall. His reptilian skin gleamed under the bright lights, and his yellow eyes looked down at the humans like they were insects. The translator device on his chest turned his hissing words into cold mechanical speech that echoed through the chamber. "We have conquered 300 worlds," he said, and his voice carried the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. "Your planet Earth is small and weak. Your people fight with primitive weapons while we command fleets that can destroy stars. No civilization has ever successfully resisted the might of the Galactic Council, Captain." Lee. Hana sat in the back row of the human delegation. She had served in the Korean Space Force for 15 years and had seen enough combat to recognize a threat when she heard one. The alien commander was not making idle boasts. The holographic displays around the hall showed massive warships that dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. The Supreme Commander continued his speech. "Each ship in our fleet carries enough firepower to crack a planet in half. We have weapons that can boil oceans and turn continents to glass. Your species has 30 standard days to surrender completely. If you refuse, we will demonstrate why resistance is futile." Back on Earth, President Kim Tae sat in a secure bunker deep beneath Washington, D.C. The transmission from the Galactic Council station was being broadcast live to world leaders across the planet. His advisors whispered nervously among themselves, discussing evacuation plans and surrender terms. But Kim Tae remained silent as he studied the alien technology displayed on his screens. General Park Woo entered the bunker, carrying a thick folder of classified documents. He had spent his entire career preparing for threats that most people considered impossible. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for enemies who could travel between stars. The folder contained every piece of intelligence humanity had gathered about the Galactic Council, and it made for disturbing reading. The aliens had a simple pattern they followed. First, they would demand surrender from a newly discovered world. Most civilizations would submit immediately when they saw the size of the Council fleet. Those few species that chose to fight would face overwhelming force. The Council would destroy their military completely and then offer surrender terms again. No species had ever survived a second refusal. Dr. Yunari worked late into the night in her laboratory beneath the Colorado mountains. She had been studying quantum physics for 20 years, but tonight, she was thinking about weapons. The alien ships used exotic matter for their power systems, and she had some very interesting theories about what might happen if that exotic matter became unstable. The world watched the news broadcasts with growing fear. Reporters showed images of the massive alien fleet gathering at the edge of the solar system. Military experts explained how hopeless any resistance would be. Politicians called for calm and urged people to consider the Council offer of peaceful submission, but in secret facilities around the globe, a different kind of preparation was beginning. General Park Woo activated protocols that had been created during the darkest days of the Cold War. Underground bunkers that had been sealed for decades suddenly came alive with activity. Soldiers who had been told they were part of training exercises learned the truth about their real mission. Admiral Kang Day received his orders directly from President Kim Tae. The message was simple and terrifying: prepare Project Phoenix for immediate implementation. The Admiral had hoped this day would never come. Project Phoenix was a contingency plan so extreme that most military leaders refused to discuss it. But as he watched the alien broadcasts, he realized that desperate situations required desperate measures. The Supreme Commander Vexstar finished his speech by displaying a holographic map of human space. Every major city on Earth was marked with red targeting symbols. Every military base and space station was highlighted for destruction. The message was clear. Humanity had 30 days to surrender or face complete annihilation. Captain Lee Hana listened to the alien ultimatum and felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. She had grown up hearing stories about her grandfather, who had fought in the Korean War. He had told her that sometimes the only way to win against impossible odds was to make the enemy think they had already won. The council representatives began filing out of the Great Hall, confident that they had delivered another successful ultimatum. They had performed this same ceremony hundreds of times before, and the result was always the same. Within days, the target species would send negotiators begging for mercy. But as Admiral Kang Day watched the aliens leave, he was thinking about something his grandfather had told him long ago. Americans had a saying about warfare: never let the enemy see you coming, and never let them know what you are really capable of until it is too late. The Galactic Council was about to learn that lesson the hard way. Dr. Yunari made her final calculations and smiled. The quantum disruptor theory was sound. If she was right, the same exotic matter that made the alien ships so powerful could also be turned into their greatest weakness. All she needed was 30 days to build the weapons that would prove her theory. Correct, President Kim Tae closed the transmission from the Galactic Council and turned to his assembled staff. The room was silent as everyone waited for his response. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm and steady. Activate all contingency protocols, he said. Contact our allies and tell them it is time to implement the Phoenix Doctrine. The aliens think they know what they are dealing with, but they have made a critical error. They assume we will fight like every other species they have conquered. General Park. Wu nodded and began making the calls that would set everything in motion. Around, the world military commanders received coded messages that they had trained for but never expected to use. The greatest deception in human history was about to begin, and the Galactic Council would never see it coming. The 30-day countdown had started, but humanity was not planning to spend those days preparing to surrender. Instead, they would use every hour to set the most audacious trap in the history of warfare. The aliens had made one fatal mistake. They had given the humans time to prepare, and Americans never wasted time when they were planning to win a war. Morning after the alien ultimatum, President Kim Tae appeared on television looking tired and defeated. He spoke slowly, and his voice trembled as he addressed the nation. My fellow Americans, he said, after careful consideration of our situation, we must face the reality that resistance would only bring destruction to our world. We are beginning negotiations with the Galactic Council to discuss the terms of our peaceful surrender around the world. Similar speeches were being made by leaders of every major nation. The broadcast showed crying civilians fleeing major cities and military units laying down their weapons. The message was clear to any alien observers. Humanity was broken and ready to submit without a fight, but in a bunker, 300 feet beneath the Pentagon, General Park Wu was coordinating the largest military mobilization in human history. The surrender speeches were carefully scripted theater designed to make the Galactic Council believe their psychological warfare had succeeded. Every crying civilian was a volunteer actor. Every surrendering soldier was part of an elaborate deception. Captain Lee Hana received new orders that officially transferred her to refugee transport duty. Her mission was to help evacuate civilians from major population centers. But the sealed envelope that came with her orders told a very different story. She was actually commanding one of 50 ships that would carry the most dangerous volunteers in human history. Dr. Yu. Nari worked 18-hour days in her underground laboratory while the world above her appeared to descend into chaos. The Quantum Disruptor Project had been given unlimited resources and a team of the brightest scientists on Earth. They had 28 days to turn theoretical physics into practical weapons. The Galactic Council monitored human communications and saw exactly what they expected to see. Governments were fragmenting under pressure. Military leaders were arguing about whether to fight or surrender. Civilian populations were demanding their leaders accept the alien terms to avoid destruction. What the aliens could not detect were the secure quantum communication channels that connected every major military installation. On Earth, these channels carried very different messages. Weapon systems that had been disguised as civilian infrastructure were being activated. Deep space monitoring stations were being repositioned. Underground facilities were coming online with technologies the Council had never encountered. Admiral Kang Day commanded this hidden network from a facility that officially did not exist. The base was built inside a hollowed-out asteroid in the belt, between Mars and Jupiter. To any scanner, it appeared to be just another piece of space debris, but inside the asteroid was the most advanced command center humanity had ever constructed. The evacuation of Earth cities provided perfect cover for the real preparations refugee ships leaving. The planet were actually carrying carefully selected military personnel and experimental weapons to positions throughout the solar system. Every transport that appeared to be fleeing in panic was actually moving into position for the greatest ambush in history. General Park Woo reviewed the deployment schedules with grim satisfaction. The Council expected human defenses to be concentrated around Earth, following standard military doctrine. But humans had never been interested in fighting fair. The real weapons were being scattered across billions of cubic kilometers of space. Dr. Yunari achieved her first breakthrough on day 15. The quantum disruptor prototype successfully destabilized a small sample of exotic matter in a controlled environment. The explosion was tiny, but the implications were enormous. If her calculations were correct, a single disruption pulse could trigger a chain reaction that would tear apart an entire alien battleship. Captain Lee Hanna piloted her disguised freighter past the outer picket ships of the Galactic Council fleet. The aliens scanned her vessel and saw exactly what they expected: a desperate refugee ship carrying civilians, fleeing the doomed Earth. They had no idea that her cargo hold contained enough antimatter to power a small city or create a very impressive explosion. The Council intelligence reports painted a picture of complete human collapse. Military resistance was crumbling. Political leadership was in chaos. The population was begging for surrender. It was exactly the pattern they had seen on hundreds of other worlds. Fear followed by despair, followed by submission. President Kim Tae met secretly with his closest advisors in a facility that had been built during World War III. The room was shielded against every known form of surveillance, and the men and women gathered there represented the finest military minds on Earth. The surrender negotiations were proceeding exactly as planned. The aliens believed they were dealing with a broken species begging for mercy. But the real negotiations were taking place in hidden facilities around the world. Every major corporation with space technology was contributing to Project Phoenix. Every allied nation was preparing their part of the plan. Every volunteer who had signed up for the refugee transport program knew they were unlikely to survive the next 2 weeks. Admiral Kang Dae received reports from across the solar system. His dispersed fleet was in position. The quantum disruptors were ready. The antimatter charges were armed. The most audacious military deception in human history was prepared to spring. The Galactic Council had given humanity 30 days to surrender. Instead, they had given them 30 days to prepare the perfect trap. Dr. Yunari made her final adjustments to the disruption network. The quantum field generators were positioned throughout the inner solar system, hidden inside what appeared to be communication satellites and navigation beacons. When activated simultaneously, they would create interference patterns specifically designed to destabilize exotic matter containment systems. The world continued to watch broadcasts showing human defeat and despair, but in secure facilities. The countdown had begun. Project Phoenix was ready. The Galactic Council was approaching confidently, expecting to find a surrendering planet. Instead, they would discover that Americans had spent 30 days preparing to teach the galaxy a lesson about underestimating humanity. General Park Woo looked at the final deployment reports and allowed himself a small smile. The Council had made the classic mistake of every arrogant empire throughout history. They had assumed that superior technology alone guaranteed victory. They were about to learn that humans had developed something far more dangerous than advanced weapons. They had perfected the art of making their enemies defeat themselves. The Galactic Council invasion fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. 2,000 capital ships arranged in geometric precision that had intimidated civilizations across the galaxy. Supreme Commander Vextar stood on the bridge of his flagship and felt the familiar satisfaction of another inevitable victory. The human planet grew larger on his view screens, a blue marble that would soon join the hundreds of other worlds under Council control. His intelligence officers reported that Earth governments were broadcasting continuous surrender requests, and that human military forces had withdrawn to defensive positions around their homeworld. Commander Vexstar activated the fleet-wide communication system. "Attention all vessels," he announced. "Maintain formation and prepare for standard occupation protocol. The humans are following predictable patterns of submission. Expect minimal resistance and complete surrender." Within 6 hours, Captain Lee Hanna watched the alien fleet approach from her position disguised as a refugee transport. Her ship drifted among hundreds of other vessels that appeared to be fleeing the doomed Earth. The Council scanners had identified her cargo as frightened civilians and basic life support supplies. They had no idea she was carrying enough antimatter to vaporize a city admiral. Kang Day observed the enemy formation from his hidden command post in the asteroid belt. The aliens were following their standard doctrine exactly as human. Intelligence had predicted they arranged their most powerful ships in the center, with lighter vessels forming a protective screen around them. It was an impressive display of military might that had crushed every opponent they had ever faced. Dr. Yunari monitored her quantum field generators from deep beneath the Colorado mountains. The exotic matter signatures of the Council ships were clearly visible on her instruments. The aliens used the same power technology throughout their fleet, which made them incredibly powerful, but also gave them a critical weakness that no previous enemy had been able to exploit. President Kim Tae prepared to deliver his final surrender speech to the approaching fleet. The transmission would be broadcast across the galaxy as another example of human weakness and Council strength. But the president had studied military history, and he knew that the greatest victories often came disguised as defeats. The Council fleet began its final approach to Earth. With the arrogance of conquerors who had never known failure, Commander Vexstar reviewed the deployment plans that would place his ships in optimal positions to demonstrate overwhelming force. The humans would see the futility of resistance and submit completely. General Park. Wu coordinated the final movements from his bunker command center. Every human unit was moving exactly according to plan. The Council expected to find Earth defenses concentrated around the planet itself, following standard military doctrine. They would discover too late that humans had never been interested in fighting conventionally. The alien commander broadcast his final ultimatum to Earth: surrender immediately and accept Council authority or face the complete destruction of your civilization. You have seen our power and you know that resistance is hopeless. Transmit your submission in the next 30 minutes or watch your cities. Burn, Captain. Lee Hanna listened to the alien broadcast and felt the cold focus that had made her one of the finest pilots in the Korean Space Force. Around the solar system, dozens of other volunteers were making final preparations, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether humanity survived. As a free species, Dr. Yunari began the activation sequence for her quantum disruption network. The field generators came online throughout the inner solar system, creating invisible interference patterns that would remain undetectable until the moment they were needed. The exotic matter containment systems in the Council ships were about to face a test. They were never designed to survive. The Council fleet took up positions around Earth, confident that another primitive world was about to join. Their Empire Commander Vexstar enjoyed these moments when victory was certain, and he could savor the inevitable submission of another species. His officers reported that human communications were filled with panic and desperate pleas for mercy. Admiral Kang Day watched the alien ships move into the exact positions that human strategists had predicted. The Council followed their standard procedures with mechanical precision, never imagining that their enemies had studied those procedures and designed countermeasures specifically to exploit them. President Kim Tae delivered his surrender speech with perfect despair in his voice. He announced that humanity accepted defeat and begged the Galactic Council for mercy. The transmission was broadcast across all frequencies so that every alien ship would hear Earth's final submission. But in secure bunkers around the world, the real countdown was beginning. Project Phoenix was moving to its final phase. The greatest deception in military history was about to reveal itself. The Galactic Council had approached expecting to find a beaten enemy. Instead, they had flown directly into the most sophisticated trap ever constructed. Commander Vexstar received President Kim Tae's surrender transmission and nodded with satisfaction. Another world had recognized the futility of resisting Council authority. He ordered his fleet to begin the standard occupation deployment, never suspecting that he had just positioned his ships exactly where the humans wanted them. General Park Wu looked at his tactical display and saw that every Council vessel was now within range of the hidden human weapons. The aliens had arranged themselves perfectly for maximum destruction. They had followed their own doctrine, so precisely that they had eliminated any chance of escape. Dr. Yunari placed her hand on the activation switch for the quantum disruption network. In 30 seconds, the invisible fields would destabilize exotic matter containment throughout the Council fleet. The aliens would discover that their greatest strength could become their greatest weakness when faced by enemies who understood their technology better than they did. Admiral Kang Day opened the secure channel that connected every human unit throughout the solar system. His voice was calm and steady as he spoke the words that would begin the counterattack. "All units prepare for Phoenix activation," he said. "The Council thinks they have won, but they have made the fatal mistake of underestimating Americans." The Galactic Council fleet hung in space around Earth, confident in their overwhelming superiority. They had conquered hundreds of worlds using the same tactics and the same technology. No enemy had ever found a way to counter their massive advantage in firepower and numbers. But they were about to discover that humans had spent 30 days preparing something that no other species had ever attempted. Commander Vexstar gathered his surviving ships in the outer solar system, trying to comprehend the disaster that had befallen his fleet. Of the 2,000 vessels that had entered the Sol system, fewer than 800 remained operational. The Bar humans had destroyed the most powerful military force in the galaxy. In less than 2 hours, Admiral Kang Day was not finished with his lessons. The human counterattack entered its second phase as Earth ships began broadcasting on all Council frequencies. What followed was not demands for surrender or threats of destruction, but detailed technical specifications of every weapon system that had just devastated the alien fleet. Dr. Yunari coordinated the information warfare campaign from her laboratory. The broadcasts explained exactly how quantum disruption fields had been used to destabilize exotic matter containment. The aliens realized with growing terror that humans had not simply defeated them, but had specifically designed their entire military strategy around exploiting Council technology. General Park Wu supervised the release of intelligence data that revealed the true scope of human preparations. The aliens learned that Earth had been monitoring Council communications for months before first contact. Every tactical manual, every technical specification, every strategic doctrine had been studied and countered. The psychological impact was devastating. The Council had built their empire on the belief that their technology and tactics were superior to anything primitive species could develop. Now they faced the reality that a single world had not only matched their capabilities, but had specifically designed weapons to exploit their weaknesses. President Kim Tae addressed the galaxy, directly broadcasting on frequencies that the Council had believed were secret. His message was calm and factual, but terrifying in its implications. Humanity had been preparing for this war since before first contact Earth had expected the invasion and had used the 30-day ultimatum to complete preparations that had been under development for years. Captain Park Min led the next wave of human attacks, but these strikes were different from the initial ambush. Instead of destroying Council ships, the humans began capturing them intact. The aliens discovered that their vessels could be boarded and taken over by enemies who understood their technology better than they did. The most disturbing aspect for the surviving Council forces was not the human weapons but the efficiency with which they used them. Every attack demonstrated careful planning and ruthless execution that suggested this species approached warfare with a level of dedication that other races found incomprehensible. Dr. Yunari released her most devastating psychological weapon, technical data that proved humans had been developing anti-Council technology for decades before the aliens had even discovered Earth. The specifications showed weapon systems designed specifically to counter every known Council military asset. Admiral Kang Day coordinated attacks throughout Council space as human ships emerged from hyperspace at alien installations that should have been secret. The Council realized that their intelligence networks had been completely compromised, and that Earth knew the location of every major military base in their territory. The aliens began receiving reports from across their empire. Human forces were appearing at strategic locations, throughout Council space, attacking supply depots, communication centers, and command installations. The species they had dismissed as primitive was demonstrating military reach that spanned the galaxy. Commander Vexstar tried to rally his remaining forces, but every tactical decision he made seemed to be anticipated by the humans. Their ships appeared exactly where his defenses were weakest and disappeared before reinforcements could respond. The enemy was fighting with intelligence that suggested they had been planning this campaign for years. General Park Wu supervised the release of captured Council communications that revealed the locations of every major installation in their empire. The aliens discovered that humans had been intercepting and decoding their most secure transmissions for months, learning everything about their military capabilities and strategic plans. The psychological warfare campaign reached its climax when Dr. Yunari broadcast the complete technical specifications for quantum disruption technology to every Council ship. The message was clear. Humans were not trying to keep their weapons secret because they were confident that Council technology could never develop effective countermeasures. President Kim Tae's final broadcast to the Council survivors was brief and devastating. Earth was not interested in negotiating with the remnants of their fleet. Humanity had already decided what would happen to the Galactic Council, and their opinion was not required for the process to continue. The surviving alien ships found themselves facing an impossible choice. They could attempt to continue the war against an enemy that had proven capable of destroying superior forces through tactics they had never encountered, or they could surrender to a species that clearly intended to dismantle their entire civilization. Admiral Kang Dae prepared for the final phase of the campaign, as human forces throughout the galaxy began coordinating simultaneous attacks on every major Council installation. The aliens were about to discover that the battle in the Sol system had been merely the opening move in a war that would end their empire permanently. Captain Park Min received orders to begin the liberation of Council subject worlds. The humans were not content with defeating the invasion fleet. They intended to free every civilization that had been conquered by the aliens and to ensure that the Galactic Council could never threaten anyone again. Dr. Yunari made final preparations for the quantum disruption network that would prevent any Council ships from escaping to warn other parts of their empire. The aliens who had survived the initial battle would remain trapped in human space until Earth decided what to do with them. The most terrifying realization for the Council survivors was not that they had been defeated, but how completely they had been outmaneuvered. The humans had turned every aspect of Council military doctrine against them and had demonstrated capabilities that made continued resistance not just futile, but suicidal. Commander Vexstar looked at his tactical displays and realized that his empire was ending. The species he had dismissed as primitive had not only defeated his fleet but had done so with such devastating efficiency that recovery would be impossible. The Galactic Council was finished, and the humans were just getting started. Supreme Commander Vexstar transmitted his surrender request on all frequencies, but the response from Admiral Kang Dae was not what he expected. The humans were not interested in accepting the submission of the remaining Council forces. Earth had already decided what would happen to the alien empire, and their surrender was irrelevant to the process. President Kim Tae addressed the galaxy from the Oval Office, speaking directly to every world that had been conquered by the Council. His message was broadcast simultaneously in hundreds of languages and carried by communication networks that the aliens had never suspected existed. "The age of the Galactic Council is over," he announced. "Earth has appointed itself as the protector of galactic freedom, and we will not tolerate any species attempting to rebuild an empire based on conquest and subjugation." Dr. Yunari activated her quantum disruption fields one final time, but instead of targeting alien ships, she used the technology to broadcast technical specifications throughout Council space. Every world that had been forced to serve the Empire suddenly had access to weapons that could destroy their oppressors. The former subjects of the Council received the tools they needed. To ensure their freedom, General Park Wu coordinated the largest military operation in human history. as Earth forces emerged from hyperspace at every major Council installation simultaneously. The aliens discovered that while they had been focused on the Sol system, humans had been deploying fleets throughout their territory. The species they had underestimated was dismantling their empire from within. Admiral Kang Day received reports from across the galaxy as Council resistance collapsed. On every front, the alien military had been designed to suppress primitive worlds, not to fight enemies who understood their technology and tactics better than they did themselves. Human forces were liberating entire star systems faster than the Council could organize any coherent response. Captain Park Min led the first liberation fleets to worlds that had been enslaved by the Council for centuries. The human forces arrived carrying not just weapons but also technology and knowledge that would allow the freed civilizations to defend themselves. The message was clear. Earth was not interested in replacing one empire with another, but in ensuring that no species could ever again dominate the galaxy through force. The psychological impact of the human victory spread faster than their military advances. Council subject worlds began declaring independence before human forces even arrived. The alien empire was collapsing under the weight of its own oppressed populations who finally saw an opportunity for freedom. Dr. Yunari established quantum communication networks that connected every liberated world, allowing them to coordinate their defenses and share technology. The species that had lived in fear of Council retaliation suddenly had access to weapons and tactics that made them more than capable of defending their independence. President Kim Tae met with representatives from hundreds of formerly enslaved worlds in a conference that established the new rules for galactic civilization. The agreement was simple. No species would be permitted to conquer or enslave others. Earth would provide technology and military support to any world that wanted to maintain its freedom. The galaxy would be protected by the very species that the Council had dismissed as primitive. Commander Vexstar found himself in the humiliating position of being a prisoner on his own flagship as human boarding parties took control of every surviving Council ship. The aliens were not killed or mistreated, but they were also not allowed to retain any authority over the military forces they had once commanded. General Park Woo supervised the establishment of human bases throughout former Council territory, but these installations had a very different purpose from the conquering fleets of the old empire. The Earth forces were there to train local populations and provide defensive technology, not to rule over subject worlds. The speed of the Council collapse surprised even human strategists. The alien empire had seemed monolithically powerful, but when faced with organized resistance from both external enemies and internal populations, it crumbled with startling rapidity. The galaxy discovered that fear had been the only thing holding the Council together. Admiral Kang Day established the new Galactic Defense Network, with former Council worlds providing resources and personnel, while Earth contributed technology and strategic planning. The system was designed to prevent any single species from accumulating enough military power to threaten galactic freedom. Dr. Yunari began training scientists from dozens of worlds in the quantum technologies that had proven so effective against Council forces. The knowledge was shared freely with the understanding that a galaxy where everyone had access to advanced defensive capabilities would be far more stable than one dominated by a single military power. The former Council territories organized themselves into independent federations united only by their commitment to prevent the rise of another empire. The species that had been enemies under alien rule discovered they could cooperate effectively when they were not being forced to compete for the favor of their oppressors. Captain Park Min received new orders to establish training centers for planetary defense forces throughout the liberated regions. The humans were methodically ensuring that every world would have the military capability to defend itself against any future threats. President Kim Tae's final address to the galaxy carried a message that redefined interstellar relations permanently. Earth had no interest in ruling other worlds, but would absolutely not allow any species to recreate the conditions that had made the Council possible. Humanity had declared itself the permanent enemy of galactic tyranny. The transformation was complete. The Galactic Council that had seemed invincible just months before was now a historical footnote. The galaxy was free and protected by the very species that the aliens had dismissed as too primitive to matter. The humans had kept their promise to show the universe what Americans were really capable of when they were properly motivated. Admiral Kang Day looked out at the stars from his command ship and smiled. The galaxy was safer now than it had been for centuries, and Earth had earned the right to call itself the guardian of galactic freedom. The Council had made one critical error. They had given humans time to prepare, and Americans never wasted an opportunity to prove that underestimating them was the last mistake their enemies would ever make. Admiral Kang Day spoke one word into his communicator Phoenix. The single transmission activated sleeper systems throughout the solar system, and in that instant, the Galactic Council learned that they had made a terrible mistake. Captain Lee Hanna pressed the detonation switch on her antimatter charge, and her disguised refugee ship became a miniature star. The explosion vaporized 3 Council destroyers and sent shock waves through their formation. Around the solar system, 49 other volunteer pilots triggered identical charges, turning what appeared to be fleeing civilian transports into devastating weapons. Dr. Yunari activated her quantum disruption network and watched her instruments with grim satisfaction. The interference fields destabilized exotic matter containment throughout the Council. Fleet alien ships that had seemed invincible moments before began tearing themselves apart as their own power systems became uncontrollable. Chain reactions. Supreme Commander Vextar staggered on his bridge as explosions erupted throughout his fleet. His tactical displays showed impossible readings. Human refugees were exploding with the force of nuclear weapons, while his own ships were suffering catastrophic power failures that made no scientific sense. The moon itself opened like a massive flower, revealing weapon systems that had been under construction for 30 years. Hidden installations that had been disguised as mining operations and research stations suddenly bristled with energy weapons that focused concentrated fire on the alien command ships. General Park Woo coordinated the second wave of attacks from his bunker as human forces revealed themselves throughout the solar system asteroid mining platforms, deployed missile batteries that had been concealed inside fake cargo containers. Space stations that appeared abandoned suddenly came online with defensive shields and attack systems. The Council fleet tried to maintain formation, but their perfect geometric arrangement became a liability as human weapons fired from directions that should have been empty space. The aliens had prepared for resistance from Earth itself, but never imagined that humans would scatter their forces across billions of cubic kilometers. Admiral Kang Day watched the destruction with cold satisfaction. The quantum disruptions were working exactly as Dr. Yunari had predicted. Council ships were losing containment throughout their exotic matter cores, causing explosions that rivaled the antimatter charges. The alien fleet was tearing itself apart from within. Commander Vextar screamed orders to his surviving ships, but the human attacks continued with relentless precision. Every time his forces tried to regroup, they discovered new weapons firing from positions that their intelligence had reported as empty. The humans had turned the entire solar system into a weapons platform. Captain Park Min emerged from the dark side of Mars, leading a squadron of fighters that officially did not exist. The stealth technology made them invisible to Council sensors until they opened fire with weapons that sliced through alien armor like paper. The Council had never encountered humans who specialized in building things, specifically designed to kill Dr. Yunari, monitored her disruption fields, and made real-time adjustments to maximize the chaos in the Council fleet. The aliens were learning that their standardized technology became a critical weakness when facing enemies who had studied it specifically to find ways to destroy it. The ruthless efficiency of the human counterattack was not accidental. Every weapon system had been designed with one purpose: to inflict maximum psychological damage on survivors. The Council had never faced enemies who understood that defeating an opponent militarily was less important than breaking their will to continue fighting. President Kim Tae broadcast a new message to the galaxy, but this transmission was very different. From his earlier surrender speech, "The deception is over," he announced to the surviving Council ships, "You made the mistake of giving us 30 days to prepare. Now you will learn why no empire in human history has ever survived the mistake of underestimating." Americans General Park Woo activated the final phase of the counterattack as human ships decloaked throughout the outer solar system. The Council had been monitoring Earth communications for weeks, but they had never detected the quantum encrypted channels that coordinated the largest military ambush in history. The alien formation dissolved into chaos as ships tried to flee in every direction, but human forces had anticipated every possible escape route. The Council fleet found themselves trapped in a sphere of destruction that extended from Mercury to Pluto, with no safe passage to hyperspace. Admiral Kang Day received casualty reports that exceeded his most optimistic projections. The quantum disruptions had destroyed nearly half the Council fleet, while the antimatter charges and conventional weapons had eliminated most of the remainder. The most powerful military force in the galaxy was being systematically destroyed by the species they had dismissed as primitive commander. Vexstar realized with growing horror that his fleet had not encountered desperate resistance from a dying world. Instead, they had flown directly into a carefully planned massacre designed by enemies who had studied Council tactics and technology for the specific purpose of destroying them completely. Dr. Yu Nari began preparing her next surprise for any Council ships that survived the initial assault. The quantum fields could be reconfigured to prevent hyperspace jumps, which meant that any aliens who escaped the immediate destruction would be trapped in the solar system until human forces could finish them. The battle that was supposed to demonstrate Council superiority instead became a lesson in why humans had survived and thrived on a planet that had spent millions of years trying to kill them. The aliens were learning that Earth had not produced a civilization, but a species of apex predators who specialized in warfare. Captain Lee Hana transmission echoed through space as her antimatter charge completed its work. For Earth, she had said, and those words became the battle cry for every human warrior participating in the counterattack. The Council was discovering that Americans fought with a level of determination that bordered on terrifying. The first phase of the battle ended with the Galactic Council fleet scattered and broken, but Admiral Kang Day knew that destroying ships was only the beginning. The real war would be won or lost in the minds of every alien who survived to report what they had witnessed in the Sol system.